All right, it's another Thursday. That means not playing politics with Alexander Keaton, and as always, my Rio Nick Bradshaw. Nick, how you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you doing?
Man, I'm good, but I am absolutely amazed at the absolutely blatant level of corruption that we are seeing now. That's been exposed. In the last couple of days, it's been nuts.
Yeah, I tell you before we jump into the dark side here, I want to take a moment. One of our fans, all the way out in Washington D.C., I want to shout out to Miss Marielle, and want to make sure that she's having a good time in a new city, and we send our best to our fans all across the country. So moving forward, we founded this channel and we talked from the beginning about wanting to present something that was new, something that was thought about differently, not just using bullet points and talking points and one buzzword after the other for each other. And I think this offers us an opportunity because we are seeing things. I'm not a conspiracy theorist type person, but I am a statistics and probability type person. And for my friends and family that know me out there, whatever they can have answered in 2 questions usually takes me 25.
Well, that's why we love you.
I mean, love is one word for it. But
that and your pasta skills.
Yeah, exactly. I pay well. That's what keeps people on the payroll. No, but what I'm saying is that I think, you and I were talking about this in pre-production tonight before the show. What is that next step? And I want to dive into it. I know on our Thursday night quickie episodes, we've got about 30 minutes to go. So I want to make sure that we dive into this. Look, I think you're right. I think that there are clearly things that are going on with irregularities that are happening. I mean, how many irregularities take place before the irregularity becomes intentional?
Right.
How many doctors come out and say, well, I've lost my last 47 of 48 patients, but that's out of it. That's not there. That's not the normal. Well, if 47 of 48 happens, then you have to ask what's happening in the process. We've seen a lot of stuff happening now in multiple states. And the part that's so striking to me is that it's happening in all the right or wrong states. It's happening exactly where you would need it to happen. Again, this is not me playing a conspiracy role. We have television for that. I'm saying mathematically, we're seeing levels of probability and statistic that are concerning because it's happening. It's happening to this isn't a one-off. It's happening too many places, and it's happening to scales that are too big.
I think. Okay, I will say this because there are people who are going to do this very, very well. We're not necessarily one of them. But very quickly, let's run over a few of these things, right? For example, Joe Biden literally was doing worse in every demographic, even in solid blue states, right? But the percentages were low. However, in just what I think it's 4 in these 4 states that are in 4 of the states that are being contested, in just a few cities, in specifically like just a few precincts, he maxes out everything. He does spectacular with all the different demographics, better than is represented everywhere else. He loses all but one of the bellwether states in counties. It's like none of this makes sense for, like you said, from a statistical standpoint. There's some areas where they vote where they were running counts, and again, only in these very small, very limited precincts, and yet Biden's getting over 96% to 98% of the vote. That's just not possible. Donald Trump got more votes for president in Venezuela in 2006 than he's getting in some of these counties.
Well, and again, one thing I want to make sure of that, like we were talking about before, it's the numbers game. But as this is a live production, I want to give a follow-up shout out by our fans, and I do want to give a secondary shout out to Miss Marielle in Washington, D.C., plugged in tonight, listening to the show, first timer. So we want to appreciate that. We are going to build this show one fan at a time.
Hey, Marielle. Yeah, we're going to do this by giving a shout out to all of our fans.
Exactly. So
yeah.
in 6,000 years, this show is going to be really popular.
Exactly.
But anyway, shout out to our teammate out in Washington, D.C., who's out there crushing it and doing great things. And we're glad that that she's tuned in tonight. So back to the storyline here. What I'm getting at is, look, here's the thing. I'm not here to pick on either candidate. I'm not here to endorse them, not for tonight's show. I want to talk about it from a probability standpoint. Joe Biden, as the last number that I heard, underperformed and lost 200 counties that Hillary Clinton had won in 2016. And yet he still won because he specifically hit the tactical, not just, states. This wasn't just electoral votes. This was specific pointed areas that were, down to delegate counts at the voting level and all the way down to, polling areas, almost even beyond, different districts and different counties. This was at a very interesting level, but I'm going to take it a step farther. I was thinking about this the other day and I wanted to bring it to the show. Here's where my struggle comes in. It's not about the potential for there to be mass fraud that they've started to uncover. It's not the potential for ballots showing up and trucks coming in and sticking USB, devices into computers. The U.S. military actually won't even utilize, in certain areas, they won't even utilize USB because of the prevalence for theft and security violation. But I mean, that's something you can see. The military, government offices, treasury offices, high-level IT offices, they just won't get around it. They won't get into using that devices because of the insecurity. But why do I bring this up? I want to take it a step farther. I want to get away from even the specific tactical level of theft, and I want to get to the social construct and the perspective. And that's to say this. Joe Biden is not a powerhouse political figure. He ran as a transitional candidate. He's not a transcendent figure in American politics. Now, like him or not, Barack Obama was. Barack Obama was a transcendent and energizing figure. He brought about a resolution and an impact to voting community, specifically the minority community, that hadn't been seen at those levels. Now, the problem that I have is that what is trying to be said is that Joe Biden, who, as I said before, I don't believe is any type of racial champion. In fact, if you look at his history, it's quite the opposite. A lot of his comments, a lot of the people that he's supported and endorsed, read about them. I mean, the information's all printed down. You can see it in black and white. What I have a hard time believing is when people try to pass off that Joe Biden was exceeding the vote records of someone like Barack Obama within the communities that he supposedly did. That's the part that I don't see. And in addition to that, what I also don't see, and again, not from the mathematical calculation of a tabulation, but more so from a commonsensical perspective, is how did the Republicans score so well down ballot in all of these votes? I mean, I'll give you that there were probably 10 million, 20 million never Trumpers. Absolutely. But were there 78 million? I don't think so. And I don't think that Joe Biden is someone that's going to garner that kind of response, unless what people were doing, which is what we talked about previously, was that this election was either pro or anti-Trump. So that's really what it was. And Biden happened to be on the ticket that was the anti-Trump ticket. I don't think people are even looking to Biden to do that. We'll see what seems interesting. The other thing that we're seeing is that we've got comments coming in. I want to tie them in. We've got our old friend Anthony writing, and we appreciate his input here. And he's bringing up good points about. You can see that the same set of circumstances that resulted in 2016 election and not matching the result. 2016 was that off the charts. How did this happen? Right. And I think a lot of it came from people thinking that Hillary was going to walk it off. The concern that I have in this one here is that the numbers were so big, and this perfect storm coming together with COVID and mail-in ballots is that I'm all about empowering people to vote. The problem is that I'm seeing that the votes that are coming in are coming in with a lacking level of security. And if it were the other way, I think anybody in the world, I don't think that this is a Republican versus Democrat or a Democrat versus Republican. I think either party would have claimed instability. In fact, a lot of the Democrats in 2016 and up through 2020 were contesting Dominion itself. So are we seeing what's happening? Again, coming from our fans out there, Tony, Anthony's writing, one thing to consider here, and I'm going to go to his inputs here. Something for us to consider is to look at Arizona. First off, how many votes, as we just discussed, do we think were anti-Trump as opposed to pro-Biden? And secondly, something to look at is how pre-voting statistics weren't matching the vote result. So where did those changes come in? And I hope I'm encapsulating what he's saying correctly. But again, whether you want to call it voter suppression or whatnot, the polling was so far off in so many areas that what it did, it has allowed you to disregard it. And I think if there's a concern, circling back to my main point, I don't see Joe Biden as a transcendent American politician. And as much as I think that there were people out there that were voting against Trump, I don't know that the numbers came up to almost 80 million.
Well,
that's why I want us to focus on the show about what our clear statement is. And our clear statement is, I think that there is evidence that needs to be provided, and we're going to stand by for that to be provided, that needs to clearly demonstrate that there was fraudulent voter activity on a mass enough scale that it could alter inputs to the election. And if so, I would hope that neither party, that all Americans would say that they want the validity and the veracity of this process to take place, because the worst thing that can happen is that we lose faith and confidence in the election process itself.
Well, so let me actually get back, sort of address Anthony's question, because I think it's a great question. Here's the thing. We have no way of knowing how many people just simply were voting against Trump, because we don't know what the votes actually were. We cannot look at the results that we got and say that these are trustworthy numbers. And for example, like you said, let's look. I mean, the statistics alone are enough to say it. Now, again, not everywhere, but in certain areas, it's clear that there was some active manipulation. But then we have things on camera, right, where they remove. They say they're going to shut down for the night. They push everyone out. They get everyone out. 4 people say about Georgia. It's on camera. You can go to Parler right now. We shared the video that was put out on Parler. You can go watch it for yourself. What happens? Everyone leaves the room. The supervisors are gone, or at least most of the supervisors are gone, and the poll watchers are gone. And then what happens? They literally pull out briefcases full of ballots, and they start scanning them for hours. These people are left alone with ballots going through it. We are getting testimony from people who were there, who are working the IT, who are working other things, where they're saying, "Hey, we were going through, and they were doing ballots. Military. They're supposed to be military absentee ballots, but none of them were registered to vote. They were doing ballots where, again, 180,000 ballots show up, and yet the counties can't tell us what percentage of people actually voted. We're seeing machines that were absolutely hooked up to the by hardwired to the Ethernet through Ethernet cables to the internet, and that there was information leaving from that area to Frankfurt. Like the simple fact of the matter is, there is legitimate evidence that there is something wrong here. This vote cannot be stated to have been done, to be clean. We need this investigated. We need to know what the actual real legal vote count was. Now, Anthony, the question is, you said, well, can't we say for every presidential election? there is always a level of fraud. Now, this is where I ultimately want to go anyway. But let me state this: while there is always some level of fraud, it is obvious, at least this time, and we don't know how bad it's gotten in others, but we know for this one there is clearly obvious malfeasance that has occurred. It needs to be investigated, or we will lose faith in the system. If the American people lose faith in our ability to vote, there is no good outcome on this. Now, here's the question: how do we move forward? Because we need to be able to move forward with this. What is the immediate pathway forward, and then what is the long-term pathway forward? For me, I think the immediate pathway forward is every single person listening to this, both of you, need to write a letter to, or get on the phone, and you need to call your state reps, your senators, and your congressmen, and you need to tell them that this election we need to really see what happened here. If you don't live in a state that was affected, still tell them you want this election needs to be validated. It can't just be a recount, because it is clear that fraudulent ballots were used. Too many people have been able to prove on just what is open voter rolls. They were able to prove thousands of people use false identities. They use false addresses. They were registered the same day, but they didn't seem to have their birth date on hand, so they used false dates. Simple fact of the matter is, there is enough wrong here that it needs to be investigated, because we don't know what everyone says. Well, but we don't know that it's probably enough to really change the election. You don't know that. That's the problem. You can't say what percentage of these numbers are wrong or right. We don't know, because there has been no investigation. It cannot proceed until this is actually resolved, until we have an actual investigation and we know this cannot be allowed to stand. Now, Anthony, is it possible this is just that we're finally seeing it? Yeah. I think we finally live in a world where this can be exposed. Now, here's the thing. I will also suggest that maybe it's entirely possible this is just the year got really, really bad. I think so many people came out. So many people were doing their job. So many people were like, "No, I'm going to vote. I want to vote in person." That it forced them to get sloppy, and that's what people are seeing. But I also think that there are people who are rising up and saying, "I will not stand for this. I will not stand for corruption." There are Democrats, and again, this is not a Democrat versus Republican thing. There are Democrats who've come out and said, "No, I saw malfeasance."
So I think we want to make sure that we take a step that I think all of us want to take in the same direction. And firstly, I would to our fans out there, especially to, and I hope I pronounced this correctly, Mr. It looks like Saltamacchia. You've got to be careful with what opinions you take. I know for a fact that some people, like, let's say, for example, I don't know. My favorite aircraft, is, anyone who knows me knows, is the F-14 Tomcat. I think most of my friends would say that if I said it were the F-15 Eagle, they would question my judgment. And they would, because clearly one is superior to the other. Now, I get off task with that only to simply say that with many of our listeners out there tonight, a lot of us can all agree on certain things. Is there really a right answer between the F-14 and the F-15? Short answer, yes, of course. But the point I'm getting at, what can we all get on the same page about here together as teammates? And that is, let's let the evidence be examined and really go forward. And I don't think anyone can stand against that. I don't think that, I watched a lot of the hearing stuff today, and it talked about forensic analysis and digital forensic analysis and going in and seeing how these ballots were cast. Fine. That's fine. If we're going to change the rules of the game and we're going to add a lot of new elements to the game, then let's make sure that the referees have a chance to make sure that all the metrics and the measurements are as good to go as possible. Now, what I would say in addition to that is, I don't believe anybody would contest us wanting to verify, again, the veracity and the steadfastness of those that were part of this process and how they were handled. And if there are irregularities that are discovered, then they would be one to do it. Now, what I think would be fantastic is that the Biden campaign has tried to present itself as the unifying party coming in, right? How powerful would it be if Joe Biden came in and said, I want all of these ballots validated? How much character would it take for him to step before the country and say, my fellow Americans, I want this job more than anything in the world, but I want to know that I earned it by your vote. Therefore, I am calling on behalf of the President of the United States and myself as the, at the moment, perceived President-elect of the United States, and we're going to have a bilateral and a bipartisan investigation into this. Boy, I mean, talk about pride. How many people do you think Biden would win over with that? How many people would step back and go, you know, I thought this guy was a real yutz, but I'm actually behind doing this, and I think it's fantastic. And I don't mean it just from a simple commentary. I mean it from the perspective of, we're going to put this process on hold until all of this is viewed. Now, the thing that I think is going to take place is, and I see our comments coming in. You know, I understand campaign slogans that are used in the election season, but I'm talking about at this exact moment when we've seen a country where a president was put under 3 to 4 years of investigation for what was titled foreign collusion during an election year. We know that these computer systems that count these ballots are housed in different countries like Spain and Germany, and people can look that information up. It's very easy to access. You can see where these corporations are utilizing these things. Why are American ballots being tabulated in places like Germany and Spain? So there's things like that need to be considered. Furthermore, I think what's important to think about here is that we've got to get away from the us versus them and blue versus red and you know, D versus R. Yeah, there's enough differences in the parties. We can go on all day about Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and how the extreme left is pulling the party in one direction, and you know how the people saw the Tea Party in 2009 in the other direction. That's fantastic. But if we're going to look at Georgia, where now we're starting to see, I mean, you're already starting to see it. They're looking at the billions of dollars they're going to spend on that campaign. And you're already starting to see things that are going sideways. Stacey Abrams is already under investigation through her organization. Her organization, I should say, is under investigation because they're coming up with these ballot harvesting schemes and voter registrations that are coming about as the stories say right now. Again, let's verify, let's trust but verify, and go back over again. I have no problem with that. But what I'm saying is that if we dive deeper, just like we did before, saying that, you know, Barack Obama was more of a transcendent character that could have brought about this kind of energy through the electorate, I would also say this. How sad is it that we view government as such a solution to all of our existence in this world, that we're literally willing to do anything we can to present, because as it's being presented right now, is that 50% of the country looks like they're going to lose their country. 50% of the country looks at it like if the Democrats take over a vote in Georgia, that the United States as we know it will cease to exist. You'll have a blown up court. You'll have more states. You'll have more senators. You'll have an amnesty bill that will basically flood any opportunities for there to be elected people as they may feel the fear of ever again. And what a shame that we've allowed politics to take this much of a role in our life, isn't it? I mean, I just don't think average Americans, I consider myself very average, you know, average Americans out there want to be so inundated all the time with politics. You can't possibly have every hill everywhere that you're willing to die on all the time about everything. It's just exhausting.
Well, it's not productive. And here's the thing, right? So that goes back to the entire point of why we titled this what it is. We have played politics for decades. So that's why we are where we are. That's why you can go back and rewatch The West Wing and see every single talking point and problem that they talk about today was as real a problem 20 years ago as it is now. That's why our potholes haven't been fixed, even though we're almost $30 trillion in debt. That's why name any problem. That's why we're not actually moving forward except for government keeps getting bigger, the lobbyists keep getting richer, the politicians keep getting richer, because we're not actually doing what politics is supposed to be doing. Politics is supposed to be the tool, and we've made it the end result. We've made it the point.
So are you aligning with the perspective that the war is not meant to be won, it's simply meant to be sustained?
I think what we are seeing right now, let me rephrase this. I think Donald Trump got elected because there were a lot of people who had that suspicion. I think the people who voted for Donald Trump weren't voting for him because they thought he was a great guy, or they thought he was the smartest and prettiest, and doggone it, people liked him. I think they recognized that he was not from the same system, that he was looking for solutions, even if they didn't necessarily match an ideology. Let's be honest. Donald Trump is not an ideologue. He never has been. He's just practical. He's looking for a solution. He will find ways to make deals that everyone can agree with so that we can move on and get things done. That's all he was trying to do. And look at what he was able to do with just that mentality. The simple fact of the matter is, I think the reason he got elected was because he had a very different mentality. And I think what you said summed it up. I think that for a lot of people, in power today, I don't think they are actually trying to solve these problems. I think they get richer by making certain that they stay problems.
Well, isn't it funny, from the perspectives of the two parties? Now, I will say from the ideologies driving the parties, I would definitely say that the hard left, as it applies through the Democrat Party, is definitely one that identifies itself through identity, right? And to speak to a community, you have to be a member of that community. And to understand the plight of the LGBTQ community, you need to have a voice. Or if you're an ally of the community, many times it's silencing. It's support through silence, right? Let us have our voice. However, it's been presented. I personally think that, everybody's got the same size soul, and I believe that we're all loved by the same creator. But the point that I'm getting at is, isn't it funny that it took a billionaire, breaking the concept of an identity to speak to a matched identity? Isn't it funny that it took a billionaire New York developer to touch to the Rust Belt and the working voters of Michigan? That's number one. Number two, to your point about the West Wing, fantastic show. But isn't it funny, the very famous line that Bradley Whitford's character says when he says, just let Bartlett be Bartlett. It's funny. I think that's actually what Donald Trump did. Yeah. Trump just went Trump. And he did it turned up to 11 because, let's be honest, this is the biggest corporation he's ever going to run. And it's an example of how that mentality got there. Now, I know we're coming up closer to the end of the show tonight. I know we try to shoot for 30. Maybe we push it a little. We've got some good engagement here tonight. We have a lot of people out there. I want to thank Mr. D Knuckle for some comments here for the show as well. Bringing different perspectives to say, well, wait a minute. Can we really look at people to call for their own demise if they knew that something like this was possibly going on? Now, again, I can't justify or verify where different perspectives are coming from with regard to how and who knew what, when, where. What I can say is this. How many times does something go wrong before people start saying there's no way that nobody anywhere knew anything ever? You know what I mean? Yeah. I think I've learned very quickly from 2016 to now, even I've learned very quickly that the phrases always and never have very little to do with politics.
Oh, yeah.
So that's why I say when you hear people with these very declarative statements, we never knew at any time anything about this. And I love this phrase. I love this phrase because it means absolutely nothing. And to my friends and family out there and the brave men and women that I'm proud enough to call friends that serve our country, I'm speaking to them in particular, who understand the phrase, who understand what it's like to use language and have it be deliberate and impactful. And I want to say this, I challenge anybody to tell them, those men and women that work in those environments where things are taken seriously, that they're going to do a phrase where they're going to say something and then they're going to go, oh, sorry, I need to walk that back. Yeah, that's not a real thing in the rest of the world.
Yeah.
I mean, I think you learn pretty much in second grade that, I think that's where we all heard the phrase, no takebacks. By the age of about 7, you learn, I know you are, but what am I, isn't a method for foreign diplomacy. So I want to button that by simply saying, what I really wish we could come back to is people saying and doing and what they're saying and what they're doing not only match up, but more so when they say something, it's thoughtful, it's deliberate. and it's owned in both directions. Meaning, if you said it, say it. And if it comes back out that there's some pushback on it, guess what? You're going to get pushback all the time. It just gives you a chance to think and defend what it is you really believe. And I think that that's why right now, at the core, to end on what we were talking about with regard to this process, the thing that we need to make sure that's really fixed, or the thing that we need to make sure is validated and verified, is the confidence in the process. Can the process be flawed? Absolutely. But there's a difference between a deliberate, defrauding and an oversight. And those are two different things. But if we investigate and we openly and transparently put the information out to the people, I think you can trust for people to know what the truth is and to make the right decision. And I'd like to see that happen. And so that's why I wanted us on the show tonight to end with the point of what we're talking about is factual, verifiable information that is owed to the American people, because this is our voice and our vote. This is our country, and these politicians work for us. And our vote is us hiring or firing them. And that's a very important part. And when we take that away and give it to computer programs, or give it to anything and any entity that is not the ballot held by that American citizen that's voting, then I think we have a bigger problem at play. And the voices shouldn't be Democrat voices or male voices or Republican voices or female voices or gay voices or black voices or young voices or old voices. They should be American voices. They should be the people that want to have their country consider their input for their welfare.
Mr. D Knuckle asked a question, and I think it's exactly where I want to end, because this is exactly the point. He asked if Trump retains the office and no heads roll, well, you've lost faith. So the subtext there is obviously for Trump to retain office, and we have to see that there was massive fraud. That Biden's lead was removed because we were able to remove the fraudulent votes.
I want to be careful, though. I want to jump in really quickly.
Mm-hmm.
If I may, please excuse me, but I want to be careful. We're using the word massive fraud. Let's remember that we're talking in some places of less than 2% of a vote. So I want to
right, but that 2% represents hundreds of thousands of votes. In some cases,
in some, sure, but not in others. I mean, in Wisconsin, you're looking at, what was it, 22,000? You're looking you're looking at 1% of a vote when it comes to 2 million votes. I mean, I just want, again.
Yeah, I get it.
But language. I know I'm being.
It's not three guys in Schenectady filling in.
Exactly. I want to make sure that the show maintains the level of direction that we've committed ourselves to doing. And this is not me coming after you. It's simply saying there's again, in the hyperbolic world that we're living in with news media, everything is a constitutional crisis. Everything is the biggest scandal of all time. And I'm gonna, if you don't mind, I'm gonna jump in when you finish as well, because I think that the question is a fantastic question, and it can be applied in two other areas that come to mind. And I'd like to ask that question when you're finished.
Yeah. So here's the thing. So I mean, obviously the pretext there is for Trump to win. Basically, we have to know that there was sufficient fraudulent behavior in voting that Biden's electoral lead, is removed and Trump remains in office. If that occurs, and there's no perp walks, people aren't shuffled off to jail, will we have lost faith? If there's no, will we have lost faith? And here's my thing: my faith is not in the man. In fact, let me state this very clearly: we should never have faith in politicians under any circumstances. They are not our leaders. I've brought this up before, but I think it bears repeating. There was a comic strip that had sheep in two lines. One's voting for a wolf, the other voting for a lion, and they're both looking at each other. And the two sheep they're casting their ballots are looking at each other angrily. Here's my problem. We're not supposed to be sheep voting for lions or wolves. We're supposed to be wolves and lions voting for servants. The entire problem is that we are voting, is that we're looking for leaders to lead us when we need to be looking for servants to do the will of the people and to serve in our best interest. That is where, and here's the problem. If no heads roll on this, okay. Honestly, I don't know how much I'm expecting on that. I don't think I have any faith that our FBI or our DOJ is going to do this. But here's where I will differ, or this is where I come down on this one. It's irrelevant if the individuals, not just the two of you listening, but if everyone, not Republican, not Democrat, not Independent, not Green Party, not whatever party, but if everyone of goodwill goes out, meaning we want what's real, we want what's honest. If we get out and we become a part of the system, we stop asking for people to lead us. But if we get involved in our local politics first, find out who your sheriff is, meet them. Like, again, if you live in a big city, I get this is a bigger thing, but get involved in local politics on the street level. We have to start advocating ourselves for a better world. We actually have to be participants in this system. We cannot simply allow the 4 or 5 people who show up to be the ones who make these decisions. We need to see this as a massive shot across our societal bow. We cannot abdicate our responsibility. Our responsibility does not end in voting. Voting is simply one thing we have to do. We need to become participants within the system. We need to hold their feet to the fire. And this is not something that we can just take a vacation on. If we want to leave a better America for our children and our grandchildren and our great-grandchildren, we have to participate. We have to get in. We have to call. We have to make it happen ourselves, all of us. And you know what? I think if we get 5 million, 10 million honest men and women out there doing the poll watching, going in to city councils, advocating, reading through the laws, saying, hey, guys, we're going to call it out here. This law is bad, or I'm seeing corruption here. And then those same 10, maybe 20 million people stand up, and we watch our local and state and then federal people. We watch them like a hawk. I think it won't matter. I think we can still fix this. I think there's a point where we need to realize we are the power, not them.
Yeah, I think the one thing that we can universally all agree on is that what we demand at all times is truth, and that truth has to be backed up with the consequence of inflicting a change should that not be the standard. And we've seen good debate going on tonight in our comment section with several of our fans out there, and I want to thank everybody for tuning in and participating and listening. I would say that the perspective that we're seeing from both sides is interesting to see, which is the veracity of the process. And if the process can change and become more efficient and more accurate, then so be it. I agree with you that it takes accountability at all levels. And my great grandfather had a term that he used to say, democracy is for the angels. And I interpret that to simply say, we want this feeling that every one person has this one voice and this one vote, and that therefore they're all equal and counted and presented in such a way that it's easy for us to coexist and utilize our collective efforts to make this the best experience possible. But I think at the end of the day, we don't know everybody's intention. And if we're going to put them into a position of power, through hegemony and having us utilize that, I just wanted to use that word. But whether we wanted to be there and surrender that power willingly for them with the understanding of them applying that, I think what we need to recognize further is that this comes down to the concept of truth. and the concept of good faith. And that's why I think that tonight, the theme that I feel about discussing this topic is not about Joe Biden or Barack Obama or Donald Trump. It's not even about people. It's about the concept of what we've come to expect regarding truth and what we need to do to apply a level of accountability to enforcing it. And I think that whether it's civic engagement at the local level, which I fully agree with, whether it's engaging our representatives, I agreed.
Yeah.
But I think it also comes down to the term that we founded this show wanting to talk about, which is knowledgeable citizenry and understanding these things. There's been great dialogue coming back and forth. I'm watching our comment section here lighting up between these topics back and forth. And a lot of the points are extremely valid. You know, if the votes came down to just you and some handful of other people that spun the election, I think we would all be pretty mindful that we'd want our votes to count. I also think that at the end of the day, when we talk about has our hope and faith in these processes been shattered, I think anytime you see a two-tier legal system, sure. I mean, we knew that these things were the biggest stories in the history of the world until they just weren't all of a sudden. We've said that on the show many, many times. Brett Kavanaugh, Benghazi, Hillary Clinton's emails, Stormy Daniels, the Russia investigation, and now the election. I mean, everything is the biggest story in the world until it's not. And then nothing really seems to happen. So when it comes to that level of accountability, it's almost like we've lost accountability in the concept of accountability. So that's why I think it goes back to your point. We need to get that civic engagement. But the only way to get that civic engagement is to have that knowledgeable citizenry to be mindful of it. But we're so inundated and flooded with topics and information coming at us in such a ubiquitous environment of news, just everywhere, absolutely everywhere. I have friends of the show that are listening tonight who work in the realm of, you know, public affairs or media or engagement across, you know, government to civilian sectors. And I mean, these are professionals that are highly equipped with the skill sets, the training, and the academia and intellect to do a job that's incredibly competitive and very, you know, high stakes. And even in speaking to them, there's a level of like, oh my gosh, there's just so much everywhere all the time. You know, it's interesting to talk to them and have them just say, you know, I want to make sure that I know enough. And that's the part. I think that most of us want to just live our lives knowing that we can have the faith in one another, or at least in the concepts of values that unite us. And that's why maybe on our next show, we'll come back to those unifying principles that maintain us as a country. So,
yeah, let's end on this, because what I do want to explore that question that you have about, you know, how there is so much information out there. How do we process it? How do we handle it? Because I would argue that I think what we have is absolutely too much information, and not that the things should be hidden, but rather we're being inundated with noise,
distortion,
and it's distortion, and it's there. I do have some thoughts of that, but I think that's an entire show into itself. So let's just thank everyone for being here. I think the broader message here is there is legitimate reason to question what's happening. But what it shows is that we, the people, have power here. We need, no matter how this ends, no matter what it looks like when this is all said and done, we can no longer allow ourselves the luxury of assuming that it's going to be okay. We have to take ownership of it. We have to recognize that we have a valuable and truth be told, we have an obligation to be a part of, to really monitor this. These are supposed to be our employees. They're not supposed to be our tyrants. From the local, your federal, you know, on the federal level, your senator and your congressman, those aren't the only people. Your city councilman, your street sweeper, your state congressmen and senators, we need to be paying attention to all of it. We are the only ones who can keep them accountable. That's it. It's just us. And if we don't, then corruption will reign supreme.
Yeah, and to everyone out there tonight for participating, thanks for taking those steps Thanks for being engaged. Thanks for coming to our little show and sharing your thoughts with us. We appreciate your input. You guys are a large part of the reason that we decided to do this show and that we are motivated to continue doing it. We look forward to where this is going to go in the future. We're open to your ideas. Please share them with us. Please reach out. We've got our Parler spooling up, and we're going to have other social media platforms coming aboard here shortly. I want to thank my host. As we come to the end of the year, this was the first year we started this show, and it's certainly provided a lot of information. But first and foremost, may all of you have a wonderful holiday season. As we go into the holidays, we'll be adjusting our schedule just to make sure that we're not interfering with your time with your families. But we send peace and positivity to everybody out there. And at the end of the day, the reason that we believe in this so deeply is because of the love we have for our country, for the values that we believe and we hold and cherish, and most importantly, because we feel that as stewards of one another, it's the best that we can do to take care of this beautiful little experiment called America.
Amen. Everyone, like this video, share this video on your favorite platforms, follow us on Parler, and we will see you next week.